And so it is my tremendous blessing. 40 Days for Life is just so generous with its teams throughout the country and probably overseas, because they have a speakers bureau and who will come around to the different campaigns, and they do this as a courtesy to all of us and all of you that participate in these rallies. And our one person that we really wanted to try to secure was our speaker today, and that is Ramona Trevino. Her story that she's going to share with her, I'm going to let her share that story rather than me giving those information to you. But she now works as the outreach director for 40 Days for Life. And she is a wife, a mother, and a grandmother, and author of Redeemed by Grace, a Catholic Woman's Journey to Planned Parenthood and Back. So I'm going to give Ramona the mic and let her share her amazing story with you.
Thank you, Debbie. As Debbie mentioned, I get to the honor and privilege of serving 40 Days for Life National Team as the outreach director. And it's just extraordinary considering the journey that I've been on over the last 14 years to now represent 40 Days for Life, an organization, a ministry that is so near and dear to my heart. As you'll learn why as I share my story with you this afternoon. I said this morning, this afternoon. It's been a long day. I'm coming in from Cleveland. So I'm wrapping up this 40 Day for Life campaign today here with you guys, and then on to Cincinnati, and then I'll head back home. But what a tremendous blessing it is to be with you. I'm extremely just humbled to see the turnout that Debbie has here today. As she mentioned before, she's always had large support, and praise be to God for all that you do and for your dedication to this mission, to the unborn, but also to the conversion of hearts. That's why I'm here. Obviously, we're in the mission of trying to save lives, to end abortion where we live, but we also have such a tremendous role in the salvation of others as well. I just can't imagine how many people have been moved, how many hearts and minds have been changed on this issue throughout the years because of your public witness, because of your prayers, and because of your fasting. And I'm certainly one of those who has had a conversion, a change of heart, have come back to my Catholic faith because of people just like you. And obviously my story is it's very long. I'm going to give you the shorter version of it just because of time. But as you can imagine, the most common question I've been asked, and I imagine that also former workers have been asked throughout the years, but for me, one of the most common questions I've been asked is, Ramona, how in the world did you end up working for Planned Parenthood? And I've had plenty of time to really reflect. I guess the simple answer would be, well, someone offered me this opportunity. It was actually an ex-coworker of mine who called me up seemingly out of the blue and said she thought of me, that there was a position available at Planned Parenthood, and she immediately thought of me, that I would be perfect for it because she had recently started working for Planned Parenthood. I think that's the simple answer, is that she presented this to me, I applied, and I accepted the position. But I think the more complex answer to that, as I've had much time to reflect over the years, is number one, ignorance. Not knowing really a whole lot about Planned Parenthood, which makes our roles as pro-lifers so very important and vital in this culture battle, because our role in community outreach, and part of Debbie's role, certainly as a 40 Days for Life leader, but also yours as volunteers and pro-lifers, is to educate people on the issue of abortion, but also to educate them on who this organization is and what they're all about. I didn't really know, because I grew up in a very small rural town, about 60 miles in northeast of Dallas. I still live there, still my hometown. And I was very insulated from the issue of abortion. It wasn't a topic that we spoke much about in our home at all. It was really one of those things that it was never brought up. My sister and I were both baptized Catholics, but that was really the extent of our faith formation. No surprise that I would end up pregnant at the age 16. Praise be to God, abortion was unthinkable. We talk about making abortion unthinkable, and it actually really was unthinkable. I never once considered abortion for myself, despite being very young. And thankfully, my parents never considered abortion for me as well, which I really, in hindsight, look back and think, what a blessing for me. Because as you all know, we often hear so many stories of young girls or even grown women today who in the past were forced to have abortions in their youth because their parents made them. And so I look back and I think, wow, I was tremendously blessed because, we were inherently pro-life. We never really talked about the subject, but it's written on our hearts to be inherently pro-life, and we definitely were living that without really knowing that we were living it. And so, what I knew of Planned Parenthood was that this organization was just like any other healthcare center, that they existed for pap smears and woman exams and birth control and STD testing and treatment. I had never met anyone in my personal circle who had ever had an abortion, and I really believed, the propaganda and the lies that abortion is safe, legal, and rare, or that they want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. So I really believe that abortion is rare. Like, who really wants to have abortions, right? So I never educated myself on who Planned Parenthood is, what they're all about, or even their history, right? So part of that was ignorance, for sure. But the other part, I realized what contributed to me staying and working for Planned Parenthood was that Satan really has a way of capitalizing on our sinfulness and on our trauma. I grew up in an alcoholic household. My father was an alcoholic for most of my life. I was in a very abusive relationship with the father of my daughter. And I had left those wounds unhealed. And I had suppressed those for many years. And I realized, looking back, that when I started working for Planned Parenthood, I was really taking that out on the young girls who were coming into Planned Parenthood. I didn't realize it until years later that I look back and I realized what a twisted way of trying to be compassionate, right? Because we always hear that abortion is the compassionate thing to do, that if you really care about women, that you need to give them abortions because of all these other reasons, right? The list of reasons go on, but we realize that this is just a really twisted form of compassion. And I had bought into that as well. Another reason that I stayed at Planned Parenthood was because my location didn't offer abortions. So we were part of an affiliate, Planned Parenthood of North Texas, which encompassed Dallas and Fort Worth, and then there were about 24 other facilities that were quote-unquote family planning clinics. And because we didn't have abortions on site, I had convinced myself that, well, because we don't do them here, I'm really not complicit in abortions, right? That happens somewhere else. And when I was really thinking about the issue of abortion, I thought, well, I personally wouldn't have an abortion. I personally don't agree that it's the right thing to do, but I believe in a woman's right to choose. But I really never stopped to contemplate and really consider, what does that choice entail? Because we all know, as pro-lifers, when someone says they're pro-choice, it really just means pro-abortion. And that the word choice is really just a euphemism for abortion, because that's the only way to really make that issue of abortion more palatable. It's the only way that we can really accept it, is if we don't really think about what is happening in an abortion. And so I bought into that lie of choice, that every woman has a right to choose, and almost took on a relativistic attitude about the whole thing. Well, it's not my decision, therefore what's right for me may not be right for someone else, or what's wrong for me may not be wrong for someone else. And they can choose for themselves. But I realized that I needed to adopt that type of mentality in order for me to continue on with my position at Planned Parenthood, because otherwise it would make no sense to stay. And for me, it was more important for me to prove myself as a clinic manager, as a director, to prove that, that I had the chops, so to speak, to do this job and to do it well. I was on a mission, and I only thought about myself. And if you think about it, all the people that we talk to who are in support of abortion are very selfish. It's a selfish way, a selfish attitude to have. And I realized that I never truly, really cared about the women who were going into Planned Parenthood, about the women who were making this decision to abort. And yet, in all the instances where these young women were making this decision, none of these women seemed empowered to me. None of them looked empowered when they walked out the door, right? In every instance, they're in tears. In every instance, they're distraught. In every instance, it just seemed like this wasn't a decision they really wanted to make. but they all felt like they had to. They felt that they had no other choice. So much for choice, right? As much as we talk about choice, so many women who go through with abortion say they felt like they had no other choice. And of course, Planned Parenthood is not in the business of life, because Planned Parenthood doesn't make money when women choose life. They only make money when women choose abortion. And so obviously they've trained us as staff, and they trained their staff on how to counsel only to abortion, only if women want abortion. They never really gave us proper training on how to present the options to the women, which is obviously something that they receive at the Women's Center, at the pregnancy resource centers across the country. Where would we be without them? That women are getting real, honest answers about these decisions, and so oftentimes they choose life because we know that this is the side that truly cares about women. We're not just pro-life, we are pro-woman, we are pro-family. And so it's just such a huge contrast to be on the other side and then to now be standing on this side of the issue. But even more so, I think about being on the side of Christ. What a miracle I experienced that I can't really put into words. I've tried. I've spent 14 years sharing my testimony, and it's always been so difficult for me to put it into words and to describe what it is that transpired during my conversion time. I was going into my third year of working for Planned Parenthood, and I was really struggling with some things that were happening administratively right before Christmas of 2010. And I remember leaving work one evening. It was during the season of Advent. No coincidence there, because it's a season of conversion. So I didn't know that at the time, but now looking back, I'm like, wow, look at God. Look at God, right? And it was during this time that I had left work and I was driving to finish up some Christmas shopping. And when I was looking for somewhere to park, I was flipping through the radio station. And it's the funny thing, because I have no idea what I was looking for. I was just flipping through FM dial, just flipping all through all the stations like a maniac. And then suddenly I flipped over to the AM stations. And this is how we know this is the work of the Holy Spirit, because I don't know about you, but who flips over to the AM stations for anything, right? And so I flip over to AM, and it lands on a local Catholic radio from Dallas and Fort Worth, Radio Guadalupe. And I hear the intro, Radio Guadalupe, Radio for Your Soul. And I paused and I thought, what? I didn't even know Catholic radio existed, right? So I turned off my ignition and I paused for a minute and I'm listening. And as they're introing back in for the show, I'll give you all just one guess as to what the topic was. I'll wait. What do you think it could have been? They were talking about abortion. And they were speaking to women who were calling into the show anonymously, sharing their very painful, tragic stories of their past abortions. And there was this common thread with each and every woman. And each and every one of them spoke of how, number one, they felt like they were treated like cattle, that they were being packed in and moved out. And that they were never really given time to think about anything, right? Let's just move them in, move them out. And another common theme with all of them, with all of the callers, were that they never felt like they had another choice. They all said, if someone had stopped and just spent time with me and given me another option, I don't know that I would have made this decision. And you could hear that despite the healing that these women had gone through and despite coming back to their faith, you could hear the pain in their voices, right? This regret, this deep, deep, deep regret. And this resonated with me. Obviously we didn't perform abortions, but yet it hurt me and it hurt my heart to hear, because I'd never talked to post-abortive women. I never met anyone who had had an abortion. And I thought, wow, this sounds horrible, right? And it resonated because I could see that we weren't giving women choices either, even though the decision to abort obviously ultimately happened after and once they went to the surgical centers. We were kind of that first person they spoke to about it. And we were never properly trained on how to give these women their real options. And so I took that to heart, and in the days that would come, Christmas, New Year's, I did the thing that you probably shouldn't do if you work for Planned Parenthood, which is listen to Catholic radio on your drive to and from work. And so I'm listening to all of these topics, and for me, it was just kind of like I was like a brand new Catholic. Keep in mind, I had actually been confirmed and married in the Catholic Church 2 years before I started working for Planned Parenthood. But it was more of a cultural thing. It was a desire, obviously it was a desire of our hearts to get married in the church, but we really didn't know why, you know? It was just something we wanted to do, which is really beautiful if you think about it. But again, it goes back to just not having the formation. And so I was really kind of being reformed in my car, listening to all of these topics. And every time that the subject of abortion or Planned Parenthood would come up, I would say, oh yeah, but that happens somewhere else. Like, I work in the good side of the business. I mean, in all reality, we're trying to prevent abortions. We're trying to help women, right? And so I continued to try to deceive myself and justify why I was there. But then God would reveal something else. And it would be just kind of this bombshell in 2011, in January of 2011. Lila Rose and her organization Live Action had released a series of undercover investigative videos. And in these videos, they went into 13 different states across the country, posing as a pimp and an underage girl. And in every instance, Planned Parenthood employees, abortion workers, were willing to cover up and aid and abet in underage sex trafficking. And so when these series of videos were released to the media, the president of PPFA at the time, Cecile Richards, did what Planned Parenthood always does when they get caught. And she went on to all the national media outlets and she said, well, these are highly edited videos. These are highly doctored, right? But, you know, I can understand the concern. So we're going to train our staff. We're going to retrain our staff across the country on how to, you know, identify this and report this sort of thing, right? And I thought, see, Planned Parenthood cares. Like, this matters to them. Except for I attended one of those so-called retrainings. And I'll never forget going into an empty, one of our empty clinics, and they had the projector screen pulled down and they began to roll film from these undercover investigative videos. And I remember sitting there and just with my colleagues and everyone else, all the other clinic managers, and I'm looking at this thinking, wow, this is bad. Like, this is what we should not do as employees, right? And in my mind, I'm thinking this is what they're starting with. Like, I'm gonna show you what not to do as an employee. But as they're going through the film and some other audio tapes and things like that the pro-lifers have exposed over the years, our administrator flips on the light and she said, does anybody have any questions? And I looked around the room and I was thinking, surely I'm not the only one not understanding what's happening here. So I raised my hand and I said, yeah, I get this. You know, I get this is what we shouldn't do, but I'm just curious, as a clinic director, what policies and procedures can I take back to my clinic, you know, in the event that something like this actually really does occur? I want to know what I do, what steps to take. And she said, Ramona, we're not here to discuss that. We're here to train you on how to identify if you're being videotaped or recorded by undercover pro-lifers. The entire time that I worked for Planned Parenthood, we had like a wanted poster of Lila Rose on our bulletin board. Like, watch out for this girl. And in that moment, when she said that, people have asked, well, what did they proceed to say? And I said, I don't know. Because in that moment, I was filled with so much disgust that I tuned out everything. And all I did was just put my head down and I looked at the ground and I thought, my God, everything everyone has ever said about this horrific organization is true. I don't know that I can continue staying. I don't know that I can continue to work here. So I hadn't been converted on the issue of abortion, more on my own personal role. But I realized, how could I, in good faith, stay in an organization and represent an organization who's willing to harm children, who's willing to cover it up? Well, that passed, and in the weeks to follow, I would hear an advertisement on Catholic radio that a group called 40 Days for Life would be kicking off on Ash Wednesday, the spring of 2011. And inviting people to join us for peaceful and prayerful vigil out on the sidewalk, and then they gave the address, and I did a double take because I thought, there's no way I just heard that right. They're going to be praying in front of my Planned Parenthood? And I thought, I didn't hear this right. So I waited in anticipation in the future to try to listen and hear, this commercial again, because surely I was wrong. I'd never heard of 40 Days for Life, even though it started in my own home state of Texas. Never heard of them. But what really struck me was this idea of peaceful, prayerful vigil. It wasn't a protest, but rather people who were going to stand on the sidewalk and pray for 40 days for an end to abortion. And I began to see that as a sign from God, that maybe God was saying, this is your chance, Ramona. This is your chance to go out and ask people to pray for you because you don't want to be here anymore, right? And so as the Lenten season began to approach, I felt this deep, deep need to go to confession. And I'd gone to confession and I was really terrified because I didn't want to say where I worked. I was afraid of the response, even though I knew what the response would be. And so I went, and my priest was extremely loving and merciful, but stern. And he said, Ramona, I know how difficult this is going to be, but you need to quit your job as soon as possible. And I thought, okay, as soon as possible. I can work with as soon as possible, because that can mean a lot of things, right? So I went back to work, and I remember when the Lenten season kicked off, I had decided, this was going to be a Lent unlike any of the other Lents before. And I had decided that I would pray the rosary daily. I, at that point, returned to Mass every Sunday. I had stopped using contraception, which was another miracle. And so God bless him. And so I had kicked off that Lent in a good way. And I had every intention to go out and ask the volunteers to pray for me when I would, the first time that I would see them. And on the third day of the campaign, that's exactly what I did. I saw this one woman standing on the sidewalk across from the parking lot. And everyone had left for the day, and I'm sitting there finishing the end of day routine. When I see this woman, I think, oh, she must be one of those volunteers, right? So I went outside, and I had every intention to go talk to her, except for she waved at me and she smiled, and I chickened out, jumped in my car, and drove away. And I got about a block and a half away, and I realized I'd forgotten something, so I had to go back. And when I went back, I tried to avoid her gaze. I didn't want to look at her. I went in, I came right back out, and then I glanced over at her, and she smiled, and she waved at me again. And it was the most loving, genuine smile. No one had ever done that before. And suddenly, I began to walk towards her. And I introduced myself, and I said, hi, I'm Ramona, and I'm the clinic manager here, and I just want to know if you'll pray for me. And she said, yeah, and so she was surprised, and she said, yeah, how about I pray for you right now? So she began to pray over me, and then we were kind of just chatting, and in the meantime, this gentleman races into the parking lot, jumps out of his car, and he comes over to us, and he's kind of pacing around behind us, waiting for his his moment, right? And then he found that moment, and he introduced himself as Jerry, who was the leader of that 40 Days for Life campaign. The interesting thing is that I would later find out that this woman was not one of the 40 Days for Life volunteers. In fact, she had never prayed in front of that Planned Parenthood in her life. She'd never prayed in front of any Planned Parenthood in her life. That was her very first time out on the sidewalk. And I learned that earlier that afternoon, the Holy Spirit had moved her, and she felt called to be on the sidewalk. And the reason that Jerry was in such a hurry was because Jerry was supposed to cover that 5 to 6 o'clock hour. And he was caught up late at work. And I realized that if that woman had not responded to the prompting of the Holy Spirit, no one would have been there that afternoon, that evening, when I went out to ask for prayers. So when Jerry and I were talking, of course, he's sharing this, he asked me first. He said, do you give me permission to share this with the rest of the volunteers and the pro-life community? And I said, yeah, absolutely. I need all the prayers I can get, right? And then in time, he asked me for a copy of my resume, and that maybe they could get people to help circulate that to help me find another job, because, they wanted to know, well, what's keeping you here? And I said, well, I need another job. We're not going to make it on one income, And So it was just a beautiful, beautiful time in my life. I can't even begin to put it in words to describe the peace, the joy, and the love that I felt in my heart. To witness for the first time, truly, this community of people, the body of Christ, right there on the sidewalk, praying for me, this person who is seemingly the enemy. And yet in this wonderful, beautiful act of mercy, all of these people, all of this community of people were rallying behind me, praying for me to leave. And when I tell people that I believe in the power of prayer today because of what I experienced at 40 days, during those 40 days, it's true. It's not an exaggeration. Because again, what I witnessed was divine. It can't be described in human terms. It was truly miraculous. So at the end of those 40 days, I'm still stuck at Planned Parenthood, unfortunately. And I'm upset because I was thinking, oh, they're gonna find me another job. And I actually went on a job interview and nothing. Obviously, God had other plans for me. At the end of the 40 days, I'm still stuck at Planned Parenthood. I go to Easter Mass. I come back to work on Easter Tuesday. We were only open 3 days a week, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And it was the first time that I had, on my commute home that evening, it was the first time I'd ever driven home in complete silence. And for 25 minutes, I'm just letting God have it. Like I'm crying out to God. I'm angry with God. I don't understand what's going on. I'm just questioning, like, Lord, what is going on? Why? Why have you brought me to this point just to abandon me? Because I felt abandoned. And when I pulled into the driveway at my house, I shut off the ignition and I turned on the radio. It was already preset to Catholic radio. And in that exact moment when I turned on the radio, this elderly gentleman calls in. And he's talking about all the years that he had spent praying in front of his local abortion facility. At that point, it had been like 30 years of his life. And the radio host proceeds to share with him the words that forever changed me. She said, "Thank you, good sir, for all that you do in defense of the unborn. Thank you for your witness. Because at the end of our lives, we're all going to stand before God. And he's going to ask us, did you know about abortion? He's going to ask, did you know that babies were being ripped from their mother's wombs limb by limb at the rate of over 3,000 a day? And then he's going to ask us, what did you do?" And it was in that moment that I felt like a sword had pierced my heart. And I began to cry uncontrollably and sob and cry out to God, "Please forgive me." And it was in that moment that I realized that for as much as I wanted to believe that I was not complicit, that I was not involved, but because abortions were not happening in front of me, because I wasn't in the back room piecing babies together, that somehow my hands were clean. And in reality, I had blood on my hands. And that moment hurt so deeply, so profoundly, and yet it was a beautiful moment of God's mercy in order for me to recognize what I had done and to be fully reconciled with Him. And truly, had it not been for your prayers, for your fasting, I don't know if that moment of grace would have happened. Because truly it was this outpouring of grace that allowed for all of the scales to fall from my eyes. I remember going back to Mass the following Sunday. It was the first Sunday after Easter, and if you're Catholic, you know it to be the Feast of Divine Mercy. I did not know this because at this point I'm like a brand new Catholic. Not only was it the Feast of Divine Mercy, it was May the 1st of 2011, but it was also the beatification date of St. John Paul II. And I was asking God throughout the entire Mass to help me, to give me the courage to walk away from my job, with or without another job, because I felt this sense of urgency. And throughout the entire Mass, God is answering prayers, whether it was through the scripture or the hymns, but it was at the moment of the consecration of the Eucharist that I heard God say very clearly to me, "Ramona, have faith in me. I forgive you." And I began to cry, and I knew instantly, in that moment, instantaneously, what I had to do. And so when I returned back to work the following Tuesday, I prepared my letter of resignation. I finished out those final 3 days. I submitted my letter of resignation that Friday, May the 6th of 2011, and I walked out of Planned Parenthood forever. Little did I know, got a better ending. Little did I know that I would be called back to say a few words for the closing celebration rally of the Planned Parenthood that I had once directed. As a result of my resignation, the Planned Parenthood that I once directed went out of business. But I did not believe it had anything to do with my resignation. I think it had everything to do with your participation, with what you did. When Jerry said yes to leading that campaign, he had chickened out twice and finally took the leap of faith to lead. And what resulted was this beautiful, remarkable moment, not just for me, but for all of the people who participated those 40 days, who dedicated their time on the sidewalk, trusting in the Lord, not knowing the result. And that's what we do. That's what you do. That's what we all do, is we come here day in, day out, and we have to trust, because we don't know the fruits of our labor. We don't know the fruits of our prayers. We don't know the impact that we are having, not just on the women going in, not just on the workers, but on every single person who drives by here to see you standing here and standing for life. Our prayers are powerful, our fasting, all of that coupled together is powerful. And people ask, well, can't I just pray from home, or can't I just pray at church? Yes, you can, and we should, without ceasing. But the power in just standing and being a witness is more powerful than you will ever know. Because I look back at that time and I think, surely there were all these people praying for me. As a matter of fact, the woman, the ex-coworker of mine who helped me get that job, ended up converting herself prior, 2 years before I left. And she said, Ramona, I've been praying for you ever since. So it wasn't just the power of her prayers, it wasn't just the power of your prayers, but it's a collective power of prayer. And that's why I'm a believer in this mission. That's why I'm a believer in what we do with 40 Days for Life. And by the end of this campaign, I'm sure once calculations go out, I think we will have reached that 26,000 mark of babies saved that we know of. And I emphasis on that we know of, because there are so many stories of mothers who come back later, either months or years later, who thank us for being out here because we were here, they chose life for their babies. And I would close with this because I think statistically it's important. I've had this privilege of being able to travel the country, and one of the things that I like to do is speak with our PRC executive directors to find out, just kind of get a feel for how things are going and thank them for all the work that they do. And one of the reoccurring themes with the directors that I've noticed in these past 3 years that I've worked for 40 Days for Life is that there is an increase in the number of women that they serve during a campaign. And we finally have a number that came out of Lakeland, Florida, from one of their directors who said they saw a 27% increase in the number of women they served during this last spring 40 Days for Life campaign. And so I hear this from Maryland, Puerto Rico, Kansas, Nevada, Florida, all over the country, and where they see an increase in the women they serve. And for me, that just affirms that even though we don't see it, we don't witness it when we're out here, something is happening, and women are changing their minds, and they're going and they're choosing life. So thank you guys for all that you do. I wouldn't be here without you, and continue to do what you're doing, and may God bless you in your efforts. God bless.